Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Real Freedom Stories. And today I'm here to talk with Frank Furman. And Frank has a company that has a unique take on working with local investors and helping to fill their units. So he is the CEO of PadSplit, the largest co-living marketplace in the workforce in the country. And prior to PadSplit, Frank, you were working as a category director at Georgia Pacific, as well as engagement manager for MicKinsey and Company out of London and Atlanta. And just a little bit quickly about PadSplit, and obviously we'll talk a lot about that. A housing marketplace that connects property owners with pre-screened residents seeking an affordable place to live. And so this is a unique model. I'm excited to talk about it. So in the model, it addresses the lack of accessibility and growing barriers to entry for lower income workers, as well as a desire for property owners to still turn a profit, but desire to support their communities. So you guys are based out of Atlanta and you operated without public subsidies as well. So taxpayers benefit. Cities don't have to spend years to construct affordable housing. And so right now, PadSplit is located in 9 markets. We've got Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, New Orleans, Richmond, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Tampa. So a little bit about PadSplit there, a little bit about you, Frank. We're so excited to have you on the show. Welcome. So why don't you just share a little bit more about your background, how you got to where you're at, and how PadSplit and your role with PadSplit came to be?
Yeah, no, appreciate that. So I, like you said, prior to PadSplit, I worked for a couple corporate kind of companies. I spent 7 years in the Marine Corps. I was an infantry officer and did 2 tours in Afghanistan. And so from there, I went to MicKinsey and was a management consultant and so on. And I went to Georgia Pacific, which is really a great company in a lot of ways. And my wife and I were I guess we'd had our second child by that time. We're talking before in the green room, if you will, about our 3 children. So now I'm up to 3, But at the time I had 2. And I'd taken this job where needed a little bit more work-life balance. I'd been on the road a ton in consulting. And I'll be honest, I got a little bit bored. And I love Georgia Pacific. It's a great place, but I was looking for something else, looking for something new, something a little more entrepreneurial. And my brother-in-law, Atticus, who's our CEO, he'd always been in real estate. It was really his kind of background. He was an architecture major at Yale. And he built up this successful real estate investment company. But at the time, this is 2017, had kind of gotten to the point where, he'd handed off most of the day-to-day responsibilities to partners. And, I was working a pretty standard job. He was having a ton of time on his hands. He'd say, "What are you up to?" I say, "Oh, I'm bored." "What are you up to?" "Oh, I'm bored too." And so we talk about this and say, I've got this idea in the back of my head, doing it for several years, this room rental model on a couple houses. There's some operational quirks. There's some nuance to it, but, it serves a part of the market that is wildly underserved and no one understands it. So that was the kind of kernel of the idea that became PadSplit ultimately. This idea that there is an opportunity when at the time, now think about how naive we were 4 years ago, thinking the market was kind of too hot. Maybe we were a touch early, but looking at things and saying, yields are compressed. He'd really built his real estate business buying in kind of 2008 through 2010. Spoiler alert, that was good timing. But come 2017, assets had appreciated so much you couldn't walk into these 8 cap deals, just kind of wild return deals. And so how do you get cash flow? How do you generate yield the way that you could while serving kind of a need in the marketplace? Because that's really the only way you get return in anything is by serving a need. There's no kind of secret to it, by creating value. So we kind of started from there. And the vision was to create this marketplace, as you said, where, one way to think about it is 2-sided marketplace. So like Airbnb, but instead of being fractional in terms of time, one occupancy, it's fractional in terms of space, one room. So long-term tenants who live in the house, but they aren't short term, right? They live and work in the communities. They're security guards, people work in fast food, hospitality, that sort of thing, but who simply, average income is about 30K a year. And folks who just struggle to afford market rents, especially as they've gone up over the recent years. And so the way to think about it is it's pretty clear why they work with us and what their value proposition is. The renters, right? They're paying a fraction of what they would for an apartment, so they're saving money. And the reason that landlords work for us is it about doubles your yield, right? So as yields have been compressed by, rising asset prices, and of course rents always lag asset prices a little bit. We're able to generally about double those yields using this housing model. And so we've built out from there. So now we've diverged a bit. Again, we've worked in a couple different markets. We've also built out a sidecar fund that sells turnkey properties to investors in some of these markets as well. But that's kind of where we've gone. So we're still on our way. We've raised 3 venture rounds. We're up to about 140 folks today. So kind of actually, that even seems a little bit wild, to be honest, because it was all about 3 of us 4 years ago. So a lot of growth, and that's kind of where we are.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the questions that people naturally would have, because I think a lot of the folks listening to this are investors in some way, shape, or form, and they're looking for creative ways, right? They're entrepreneurial. They're looking for the next cool thing, the next shiny object, and creative ways to increase their profits. So something like this naturally would appeal to a lot of investors. So let's talk a little bit of how that looks in a new market. If I'm looking at doing this, the idea sounds good. We love helping people, providing affordable housing. What does this look like in a new market?
We are very intentional about how we approach new markets. And the reason for that is that this is the kind of business where you have network effects. So if you were to open one Padsplit home in say, Minneapolis, where you are, it probably wouldn't be great, right? So the residents in the home, they wouldn't be able to transfer between houses if they have any sort of conflict. Obviously, or if they change jobs and are on the other side of town or that kind of thing. So having a network is valuable to them. And then for the landlord, most of our residents come from referrals. So getting that flywheel turning takes a bit of a critical mass.
So the tenants are paying a membership fee to be able to stay in these. So what's the benefit of them is it's simple. I pay 1 bill a week. I don't have to have the utilities in my name and set all that up. I'm essentially keeping it small and simple. And so maybe just quick cover kind of the quick benefits to the tenants here.
Exactly.
The residents.
The way to think about it for the residents is in traditional housing, apartments, houses, whatever have you, the barrier to entry is really high, right? So especially for low income residents, right? You come in and the landlords aren't dummies, right? They want to see proof of income. They want to see that you have income, maybe 3x the rent so that, you can cover it. Usually have to do first month up front plus a security deposit. In some cases, first and last month's rent, especially for maybe lower credit individuals.
Yeah.
And then,
which, if you think about it, like, let's say rent's $1,000, that's a $3,000 check that somebody's got to write if it's first month, last month, and then your next month of rent. I mean, that's a significant amount.
It's a tall order. Exactly. So there's, so that's a struggle. I mean, most Americans don't have $3,000 in their savings accounts. That's just the sad reality of it. So the barrier to entry is relatively high. And then even beyond that, you're turning on utilities. Depending on where you are, you might have deposits on your utilities. Maybe that's another $500 to turn everything on, and Wi-Fi, and all that takes effort and time. And then of course, furniture, furnishing a house, if it's a rental, maybe costs you another couple $1,000. So really a tall order for a lot of folks, especially for people who certainly have low income, but maybe don't have the kind of social network that many others enjoy, don't have family in the area. They can't stay for 2 months to build up reserves or maybe borrow furniture or that kind of thing. And so, when we really kind of started the business, for me, I looked at it and said, this is something that I've always done. When I was in grad school, I rented a room. I didn't think anything of it. When I was in the Marine Corps, I got a house and rented out the rooms to my buddies. We split a house. It's the kind of thing that people in higher, socioeconomic classes, if you will, think of as something they do during a time of their lives. They don't think anything of it. And it's relatively easy to access, even if it's just staying with friends, even if it's staying with family. But for folks who perhaps have a lower credit score, lower kind of social network, kind of credibility and so on, maybe they haven't been to college, they don't have that network to fall back on, it can be pretty difficult to access. So our thinking was, how do you democratize it? How do you make that accessible to everybody for when they can't afford to buy, their own house, they can't afford the thousands of dollars out of pocket to do it. So the part of the point was, while keeping underwriting standards high in terms of income verification, which we do, and background checks, which we do, and credit checks, which we do, to lower the barrier to entry as much as you possibly can, and to simplify it as much as you possibly can, and to bundle it all up. So now a resident of PadSplit, they come in, they pay this membership fee, they're members of PadSplit, and bundled into that is certainly their rent effectively, but also the utilities, power, water, Wi-Fi, kind of the whole bit, and then furniture, because they're furnished units. So, and then the one thing that is, we get asked a lot as well, that is along the same lines, is around the weekly billing and why do we do it that way? And for us, that was kind of an early insight in terms of how you keep collection rates high, right? So traditional rentals, why do we bill on the first of the month? Well, it's easy for the accountants, it's easy for your lender. We're lazy, right? It's easier for collections people. That's, we've always done it that way. That's kind of the long and short of it. But for, in particular, workforce housing, people are much more likely to be paid weekly or bi-weekly. And it's just always kind of keeping on. It's more in the mode of how people think. So when's the first of the month? I don't really know. I guess it was about a week or so ago. When's Friday? Well, I know what day it is today. I get paid on Friday, I get billed on Friday, I pay it. So it's always keeping in mind. And, one anecdote I like to use is, if you're familiar with Rent-A-Center, the furniture rental place, they're smart, right? They bill at the end of the month. Why? Because people pay bills sequentially. So, you talk to someone who maybe's been evicted, how are you here? Well, I paid for my furniture bill that came on the 28th because I don't want to lose my couch. And I paid my cell phone bill because I don't want to lose my cell phone. And I paid my, gas bill because I don't want to lose my heat. And then I know enough for my rent on the first. And it's like, well, that was a terrible idea because you could have lost the couch. That'd be fine. Now the couch is gone anyway. So just kind of breaking that model that landlords have. Why do we bill on the first? Because it's the way we've always billed, kind of turning around and making it more customer friendly and customer focused. Now we, of course, handle that on our end. And from the landlord's perspective, we pay out one payment at the beginning of the month to make lenders happy and your bookkeeper happy and all that kind of good stuff. So we handle that complexity. But to get back to your question around launching markets, again, we're very intentional about how we do it. And so we've done a top to bottom screen of the top 100 metros in the US for regulatory space and availability of housing stock and sort of the intrinsics that we think are kind of your min threshold. And the way that we've sort of classified metro areas is, on one hand, this could probably work almost anywhere, and to some extent already does, right? These rent by the room assets exist in every metro area, whether it's a tier 1 market like San Francisco or New York, or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. These things exist. In some places, it's much more developed, like say New York City, where it's incredibly well developed, and there's maybe hundreds of thousands of these in existence. Whereas in other places, it's much more nascent. But we've done that high level screen. But really, we're pulled into markets by investors, right? So we're talking to folks all over the country. I've spoken events all over the country. I do podcasts and webinars and things like this, and spoken to real estate investment association groups. And it's funny. And anywhere I go, people say, Frank, the thing about St. Louis is we have an affordable housing problem. Like, I don't know. I believe you. It's also true lots of places.
Oh, that's the only place in the United States that has that. You are the one. Your market is so unique.
Once I find that one, it's and it really speaks to the universality of this challenge, because it is true. I mean, these people are speaking the truth when they say, hey, we've got an affordable housing challenge, because if you work at Burger King or your security guard or whatever, you're a working person. It's tough to afford market rates, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be New York. It doesn't need to be Los Angeles. That's true in St. Louis, and it's true in Philadelphia, and it's true in essentially any metro area, or even non-metro areas, right? Even in more rural areas. So that's true because the barrier to entry is still high, and rents are still high. But we're pulled in by investors, so we work with investors to come in, en masse, because we want to do it right. We want to do it where we have enough properties in a reasonable enough amount of time, such that people can transfer, they have options in the marketplace, and we get those economies of scale with marketing and everything else. So for us, it's a matter of really partnering and working tightly to introduce ourselves to the market well, where we, market the units, work with the investors, make sure they're coming up with good outcomes. Because for us, we're on our growth side hyper focused on investor outcomes, because if investors do well, they're human, and they do what humans do. They do more of it, and they brag to their buddies, right? And if they do poorly, they do the opposite, right? They do less of it, and then they tell everyone, don't work with PadSplit. And so they don't pay me enough to put up with bad outcomes for investors, because all those things are bad. So we're hyper focused on investor outcomes, and that means saying no to business, potentially wrong markets, potentially wrong investors, certainly wrong assets, right? I mean, every day we'll have someone come to someone on our sales team or growth team and say, hey, what do you think about 123 Main Street? We'll say, oh, I don't know, it's on a cul-de-sac, parking will be really tight, or it's in an HOA, I'd waive off. Or hey, it's too small, you're not going to get the lift in yield that you think you would get. You won't have enough bedrooms, and you shouldn't be doing a little bit better, you should be doing a lot better. That's kind of, maybe you should think about the next one, and really kind of taking it from there.
So because naturally, then I know the questions come up from investors about zoning and the number of occupants, because if we're renting out a unit as a 3-bedroom unit, and now we have 3 individual tenants, how do you work through those questions of kind of the zoning and the capacity pieces in those markets?
Right. We have an incredibly overworked legal team is the bulk of it. Now, there's a few ways to think about it. So part of it is just from a pragmatic standpoint. What matters a lot more than the specific zoning code is actually kind of the asset itself. And what I mean by that is that, zoning isn't sending around SWAT teams and counting toothbrushes or what have you. It's all bottom up, right? Neighbors complain about issues, that draws code enforcement to create issues for landlords. And that's true of any rental property, but the effect is magnified for co-living, right? So, when I said earlier, hey, I might waive off this property because it's on a cul-de-sac. Well, it's because if you have, say, 6 people in a house and you have 6 cars and you have 2 parking spots, someone's going to park in front of someone's mailbox, that person's going to call code enforcement, and you're going to have issues. So how do you kind of avoid those issues? And so there's a little bit of an art and a science, completely independent of the regulatory space, to say, hey, this house has, is close to public transit. It looks good on the street that it's on. There's other renters in the neighborhood. There's maybe parking around the back, or one of the, a different framework for how you think about the asset, to say, hey, this is something that will be in harmony with the neighbors. And if it is, you're not going to have issues. Or this thing's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Your neighbors are going to go crazy. It doesn't matter if it's by the book. If your neighbors hate you, you're going to have problems, right? It doesn't matter what zoning says if the lady across the street despises you. So there's kind of that's something that we go through all the time. And then the second part of that is really just operational excellence. When you look at the issues that cause neighbor complaints, usually it's not some hyper specific or legalistic argument to say, oh, this is in violation of zoning code. It's this person didn't cut the grass, or hey, the trash fell out around the trash cans and no one picked it up and the place looks bad, or someone parked on the grass, or what have you. Things that are annoying, they're true for any rental property, but those are the things that drive neighbors crazy, right? It's people making their neighborhood look bad or making them feel less safe and what have you. So again, a lot of that falls on the host, the landlord who's operating the property. We have mechanisms in place. So we have a neighbors page. Neighbors can come direct to us so that we can notify the house, some of those things that are in place. And it's never perfect, right? Sometimes people, they want to call code enforcement because it's a slow Tuesday, and that's
Mm-hmm.
part of life and part of being a landlord.
Yep.
So with that out of the way, there is, of course, places that are much more regulatorily friendly than others, right? And so that's part of why we did that initial screen. And again, it's not to, there's something like 5,000 different municipalities in the United States that have their own zoning code. We did not do it for 5,000 municipalities. There's 83 just in the Atlanta metro, and we're in about 20 of them, which is part of why we work with local investors who, understand not just their local zoning and can kind of think through that framework, but also be pragmatic about it and say, hey, this is maybe a fit for Minneapolis, but it might not be a fit for the suburbs or what have you, or maybe it's a fit here and maybe not, because there is a little bit of a look and feel aspect to it. But we do partner closely, and we do have a wildly overworked legal team that does look into it for specific examples, because it is a challenge. And the way to think about it is municipalities they really have a couple different types. There's some where essentially it's undefined or co-living is legal, right? That tends to be relatively rare, but there's plenty where that is the case. There's others where it is legal but constrained, right? So capped at a certain number of people, what have you, all fine. Or there's some sort of registration requirement, and okay, great, it's defined but not there. There's others where it's pretty gray area, to be perfectly honest. So I'll give an example. I live in DeKalb County, Georgia, sort of suburb of Atlanta, and they do prohibit boarding houses, but they're defined as rent by the room operations that provide meals, which we don't. So it's one of those things where it's a very kind of awkward prohibition, in many ways, where something somewhat close to us, candidly, is outlawed.
Yep.
But not really us. So it's a little bit messy. And then there's other places where it is pretty expressly prohibited, right? And that's more what we focus on, because usually if it's not a black and white issue, you can get by operating it well, being responsive, fixing what needs to be fixed, or operating within the constraints of that local market. And look, there's, again, all the time we say to people, boy, you shouldn't do it there. That would be a bad idea. And a good example is an HOA, where actually in HOAs, oftentimes it is gray area and it's not really defined, but you're sort of self-selecting for neighbors that might not want you to do it. So anyway, that's kind of a recommendation that we make, is just to avoid HOAs.
So we've kind of talked about, conceptually how it works for the renters, conceptually how it's worked for the landlords. Talk about some of the success here, like some of the good stories of how it's impacted people, how it's impacted the landlords. What are some of those successes that you can share of where it's paid off?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I really kind of always sticks with me is our first ever host, as we call him, Heather. I won't use her last name, but her name is Heather. She probably won't care. She's she's married, she's a mom, and she had an interior decorating business that was, was doing fine, and her paying her bills, and her husband's working, and she was crazy enough to be our first customer, right? Which is a certain amount of craziness. This heavy duty professionalism that we exhibit now was just not the case at the time. So she started with us, started with one property, did really well, came on with another, and now she's up to 7. And she's at the point now where she's generating over $300,000 a year in revenue. And she's essentially fired herself from her job and fired her husband from his job. And, she's hanging out and traveling, and, she had pretty good timing in many ways. She was buying kind of before the really rampant appreciation of the past 2 years, but, it's really changed her life. And again, she was, and I say this with love, crazy enough to work with us, but there wasn't anything special about her story, in that she didn't have any special skills per se. In this, she was buying and renovating, skills that lots of people have, and lots of people do the same things that anyone do when they're in this space. She just took a chance and followed through, and then did it again, and got long-term debt and did it again, and got term long debt and did it again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now at a point where just really over the course of a couple of years has built in a business where she doesn't really have to work again, which is life changing. So, we've seen it kind of really big to small. I mean, we have investors who are just getting their start, right? This is their first investment property. It's their first foray into real estate investing. And this is how they want to do it, because they have just enough to get one property across the line. If they're going to do it, they want it to be high yield.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have big institutions, family offices, kind of Wall Street backed funds who are doing it because they've got a lot of money to deploy and yield is really tight. And, what I'm really passionate about is making it work for both, and having that same sort of core value proposition, which is maximizing yield, doing well and doing good at the same time, and having it work for, the banker in New York and, the young person who's, just trying to scratch that real estate investment itch and,
Mm-hmm.
try not to make a big mistake that'll put them out of the game, kind of thing. And so, that it requires having a broad perspective and thinking really kind of about, really honing in on what that value proposition is and how we make it easy for people, easy for people who either don't have a ton of resources, and maybe we can build up the vendor network and make it easier for people to kind of do it in a turnkey fashion, or easy for folks who want to do it at the enterprise level and need enterprise level tools and need to be able to have kind of great analytics and visibility across their portfolio so they can make better investment decisions and be accountable to their investors. So, really kind of, trying to make it work for everyone. Because our core conviction, when we started the business and as we operated, is that even if we screw things up, and we screw plenty up, certainly me personally, there's just an enormous unmet need for the product in the marketplace. So again, the asset doesn't have to be perfect, and the market doesn't have to be perfect, and the investment or the investor doesn't have to be a perfect operator. In fact, rarely are all three of those things perfect. But you're still providing a product that doesn't exist, or at least not at scale, at least not the kind of accountability and kind of ubiquity that we provide it with in these markets. So you can still do really well, even if it's not a perfect asset. In fact, it rarely is, right? Because if you're buying today, you got to buy whatever you can get your hands on. Your inventory's tight. And so we're always working with investors who are buying imperfect assets in imperfect areas and rehabbing them in a time where labor costs are as high as they've ever been. Maybe they're being rehabbed in imperfect ways, but fortunately we're in the business of it can be imperfect, as long as it's there.
How do you just quickly thinking about advertising, is there any specific advertising you guys do for rent by the room, or is it kind of the traditional rental websites that everybody else uses, or how are you finding those specific kind of rent by the room crowd that are looking for that?
So it's a mix of things. A lot of it is, I'd like to say traditional, but it's clearly it's not, I guess not traditional. Performance marketing, online ads, Google, Facebook, kind of things. That's certainly a big part of it. We also have created the capability to where when an investor lists a property, we automatically put it on over 40 aggregator sites, so Zumper, Roomster, those sorts of things, where we push it out and it goes through those more traditional channels. It's not everywhere. I mean, so I'll give an example. Zillow really doesn't like room rentals being posted on their site. They hate it. It screws up all their algorithms. They do block us. Craigslist we would love to post on, but they want to be peer-to-peer. They don't like businesses kind of posting en masse, so they also shut things down and make that difficult. But many are much more open to that kind of offering. So we do a little bit of both. Then we do some other ads, whether it's print or in transit, that kind of thing. And then referrals are a big part of our business. So we do pay for them. We offer referral bonuses for renters when they refer their friends and so on. But about 40% of our residents come from referrals. So that's our kind of most effective channel in many ways.
It's an exciting model. I like new ideas, a way to meet a legitimate need in the market. and you guys are doing that. And so I'm excited to hear the story of, the landlord that's now able to fire herself and her husband, and excited about the residents that can find that affordable housing and meet their need without having to shell out all that money out of pocket. So I love what you're doing, and excited to highlight it here. Any last, words or thoughts that you want to share?
If I can maybe share one last landlord story, because I feel like I'm remiss if I'm not. Actually, our first employee is a guy named Jean, who is, I joke with him. I say he's a young guy. He's really not that young in my book, but he's probably 30 or so. But he's, our first employee. He actually lived in a Padsplit for a bit, and he bought his first home and then became a Padsplit host as well. And kind of, again, one of those things where he's since built his career in real estate. I mean, he obviously works for us, but he's got his agent's license, and he's really become an expert. He works for our kind of sidecar fund and has become an acquisitions expert. But, he broke into real estate investment where, essentially house hacking, effectively, but he's really kind of paid it forward. Not only has he built this skill set and essentially bought a home for free, which is pretty hard to do in the year 2022, where you own a home and are building equity, but you're not making payments. That's a pretty special thing to do. But he's also kind of enabled things for others. So one of his early members was a woman named Kiosha, who saved up enough money living with him, renting a room, that she was able to buy her first house. So it kind of compounds over time. And, the model seems different for a lot of people. Maybe they haven't experienced it, but, and they'll say, oh, this is pretty interesting. I should ask my kids about it. They understand sharing, and millennials or Gen Zers or whatever. And I'm like, no. Ask your grandmother, because this is the way people used to live. If you were a woman in the 60s and you were working as a typist, your first job in the big city, you lived in a boarding house, right? If you were a factory worker at that time as a single guy somewhere, you boarded, right? And for lots of reasons that we don't have the time to go into, that mode of living has kind of been beaten out of our culture and our law to some extent. But it's not strange. It's actually something in some ways we've all done, whether it's living in dorms, your kind of first house out of college, that kind of thing. It's not as different as you think. There's a huge need. It's a product that's been around forever. We're trying to do it better. We're trying to do it with technology. We're trying to do it with kind of modern underwriting and marketing and so on. But there's someone who's listening to this who's saying, oh, this is interesting, but seems a bit out of scope for me, couldn't do it. It's not as different as you think, is what I'd leave you with.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it. So Frank, for people that want to learn more about Padsplit, what's the best place for them to go, or what would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, easiest way, just go to our site, padsplit.com, sign up. If you create an account, one of our very helpful and knowledgeable account executives will reach out very quickly, I assure you, and they can kind of help you with anything you need. But yeah, we're easy to find.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing the success that you guys have had. It's phenomenal, and excited to see where it's going to go in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us on Real Freedom, This Story. That was an awesome episode. And as we look to grow in 2022 and beyond, I want to know, what do you guys want to learn more about? We want to hear from you. What's going to be relevant to you? So post a comment below. Let us know what's something that we can help you with. What's a question you have, something we can address in an episode to get you answers, or something that we can share. So we want to add value. Let us know what you want to hear about in the comments below.